Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Embolden. I am going solo tonight because the show has to go on. And I just want to talk about this topic. And if anybody is in the comments section checking this out, wants to get controversial with me because I am Embolden, we talk about controversial issues in comics and pop culture. And screw it, I'm going solo, as I stated. So I want to talk about the bankruptcies dealing with Frankie's comics and Aftershock Comics and everything that's going on with those two companies. I think it's super interesting. And I think that obviously people have heard the news, people have seen what's going on, but I don't really see anybody talking about how a bankruptcy actually works. So, a bankruptcy, for those who don't know, is a financial tool. It is a financial tool to allow a company to do two things and only two things: either reorganize and potentially save themselves and prevent a bunch of firings and a bunch of people losing their job and a business from going out underneath and basically not existing, which is bad, or it's to start what is known as a liquidation process to get rid of merchandise to pay creditors. Now, what happened with Frankie's comics is a little bit different than what happened with Aftershock. And so I figured I would talk about both of those things. But before I get into that, if anybody's out there, you're seeing this, you want to join me, you want to join the conversation, you are more than welcome to come hit me up, stop by, hang out with me. We could talk about this issue in an adult fashion. So basically, we're going to start with Frankie's comics. So my take on what happened with Frankie's comics, and these are the people they owe money to, the top 20 creditors. There's several others, but these are the people. This is the list. My understanding, probably what happened, and this is just my guess, is that they did not have a good 18 months. In the last 18 months, they had a lot of variance. They were probably spending a lot more money or utilizing money on sort of a float basis to keep up their variance, saying, hey, it's going to turn around. And in a few quarters, we're going to have a lot of merch and we're going to sell it like that. And maybe their variants weren't moving as fast as they wanted them to, but they were in what is essentially a variant trap, meaning you have to constantly put out X number of variants to get, Marvel, DC, whoever you're working with. You have to order a lot of comics, and that requires a lot of capital. And that if you don't bring in 20 new variants, you're going to displease your already existing customer base, as well as you're going to fall out of rankings. And so it was almost a trap that it works when you're selling through. So if you're selling through 90% of your inventory of the variants you print, the 4,500 you print, or the 4,000 you print, or however many you get out of a shared retailer, then that's great if you're selling 90% because you're profitable. When you're only selling 70%, you fall into a trap, but you still have to commit or put out another 20 variants and spend the money for the art. And so what probably happened was that they were in a situation where they were selling maybe 70, maybe even 80%, but they were just barely breaking even or a little bit below. And then they probably went to somebody like PayPal. I think Shopify has something. I think, Simply Funding has something. And there's all these companies that you could borrow money from. But the way it works is that you have to service that debt. So debt servicing, for those who don't know, means that, you basically make a conscious decision where you either can pay just the interest and continuously pay the interest. So if you borrow $100,000, the interest might be 9%. So you're paying the 9%, but your principal is not going down, but it's also not increasing. So you're always paying the 9%, and the people you owe money to, they're happy because they're getting their interest payments. Or maybe you're paying the 9% and then you're paying an extra $1,000 every month, and essentially it's going to go downward until that debt is wiped out. And that is a financial business instrument. When companies have debt on them, sometimes they just service interest. And I know this because I'm an investor in several companies that do this in land use and a variety of other things, as well as I have a lot of corporate small business bonds, U.S. Treasury bonds, and things of that nature. So obviously, that is debt servicing. And so probably what happened, what triggered this with Frankie's, is that they missed a payment. And I'm willing to bet it was, I think, either Shopify's on those lists. I can't exactly see the list perfectly, but I think Shopify is on this list. I know that PayPal is on this list, I think 3 times. And then I know Simply Funding was on this list. And then I know there's maybe a few others that lend out capital to small businesses. So they probably missed a payment or 2 or 5. And once you miss one, there's terms most likely in these contracts, and I'm not an expert in any of that, that triggers an automatic reel in the ship. And you might owe the whole sum of money, or they put a stopgap on you. And then they want to reclaim the debt immediately, or as much of it as humanly possible, because now you become not an asset to PayPal, Shopify, Simply Funding, you become a liability. And so that's probably what triggered this entire circumstance with Frankie's comics. You know, if you owe $6,000 to somebody, I'm not saying $6,000 is a small amount of money, but in the scheme of life, $6,000 is not hard. In legitimately 3 months, the owner of Frankie's Comics can drive Uber and make $6,000. You can service $6,000 relatively easy. If their biggest issue is that they owed $6,000 to Ivan Tao and that was it, that's an easily workable solution where it's so easy to deal with. You go to the bank, you just deal with it, and you basically take out a line of credit, and there you go. Or if you have a house, you borrow against your house $6,000 and you slowly pay it off, and you use a reverse mortgage to take care of that. But that's not the issue with this, is that they owe a large amount of cash that was probably triggered, and probably it triggered PayPal and a variety of other stuff because they couldn't service the debt, and not even the principal. I'm not even talking about the principal. They were probably trying to service the principal too. So the way it works is that when you borrow money from PayPal, they're going to charge you an interest rate to a degree. They might give you a year of 0% interest. I have a PayPal account. If you have a PayPal account, you can actually borrow from PayPal, and I could borrow up to $6,000 from PayPal for my business, for my eBay business. They want me to. I don't need the money. That's what happened. But when you have a company like Frankie's Comics, and if you have a lot more money and you're doing $200,000-$300,000 maybe, you could borrow more than $6,000. And that's what happened here. And bam. So that's what triggered that. Now, it's about $1 million they owe. So let me explain. Owing $1 million is nothing for any small business, medium-sized business. If you're a big business, $1 million is nothing. So in reality, Frankie's Comics isn't a problem at the moment. The reason why they filed a Chapter 11 is a Chapter 11 gives Frankie's Comics the ability to say, cool, we don't have to pay our creditors for 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, however long it takes. They go before a judge, bankruptcy court, a trustee is appointed, and from there, what starts happening is they can delay that. So they can say, well, we're not ready. How about we adjourn it 3 weeks? Great. The clock doesn't start ticking until they go through that process. And this is obviously a little bit more complicated than I'm explaining, but the clock doesn't start ticking until they do that. So now a trustee gets appointed, and that person is in charge of relatively a good chunk of the business. Now, that trustee is not ringing you up, not stocking the shelves. Obviously, you could have employees, but the trustee has to sign the check to the employee. The trustee has to order the comics or tell somebody else to order the comics. A trustee is appointed by the court. And so now, following this entire bankruptcy, the point of a trustee does a few things. A, it prevents somebody in the middle of a bankruptcy from running away with all the money, saying, see you guys later, we're done here, and I'm running with whatever free cash we got, and I'll see you in the next one. It prevents that, for starters. It also allows for reorganization to occur, because again, the point of a bankruptcy is twofold. It's either to reorganize, stabilize the business, and try to get the business back on track so the business continues, or to go to liquidation. Sometimes you try to reorganize and it winds up going to liquidation anyway. Sometimes a business spins out of a liquidation, and there you go. Sometimes a business breaks into two parts, and there you go. That can happen too. So now the trustee in the first thing of trying to stabilize is making all the money and business decisions over the owner and its appointed to make sure that that reorganization occurs. Also, what a trustee does is that if you're a business owner and we have a list of 20 people here, that business owner and whoever owns Frankie or whatever people own Frankie, they might have favorites on this list. And the last thing you want to do is if you got $200,000 is pay the people you like and leave the other 17 people, you got 3 people you like, saying, sorry, you're out of luck. So if everybody is going to get paid a certain cent on the dollar, the trustee is now in control of the money so that the owners or whoever is in charge of the money can't play favorites, pay off certain people, and there you go. Now, the trustee also will allow for operating income to occur. So if Frankie brings in 10K and their operating income is $7,000, the $7,000 is going to keep the employees and things of that first. So that is the only time favoritism is going to be played out, is that if any money is going to go to the creditors, it is after operating costs if you're trying to stabilize and continue the business. And that is the trustee's job. But as I was stating, $1 million is nothing. In a matter of probably 6 months, Frankie Comics can raise $1 million in a lot of ways. So first and foremost, what's probably going to happen in this Chapter 11 reorganization is that they're going to come up with a battle plan saying, cool, how much do we really owe to our creditors? How much are they willing to take? In which are they going to take 80 cents on the dollar? Because if they're going to take 80 cents on the dollar, everybody, that brings that bill down to 800,000. Now we went from $1 million down to 800,000. Now, following that, they might take 60 cents on the dollar, which brings it down further. Then, cool, how much money do they need to operate? Is there people who want to invest in the business? Is there people who want to issue other things? Does Frankie Comics want to do bonds and issue bonds and put that and service that debt to get out of this circumstance? What is their battle plan? How much capital, how much assets do they really have? And what can they do? First off, maybe the business is going to get sold for $1 million. They negotiated down some of that debt, and some of that debt now is going to be paid because the business got sold. Maybe during this reorganization, there's going to be a liquidation factor that occurs. So obviously, all this is what's going to be discussed. And the point of a Chapter 11 is that it really allows for those conversations to start without having a pressurized position where your doors are going to be locked or you're going to be massively sued by creditors. So that's really what's going on with Frankie's. Now, I think that easily, there's somebody out there who can invest. I mean, hell, I have money. Honestly, I might have been an investor at a minority stake in this company to some degree. And I say that very honestly because I can see the potential. And the way I would have set it up is that it would have had to be bond venture debt, essentially. So somebody is going to be interested, and I'm sure there are talks, I'm sure there have been offers on this issue. And so that's the thing that's super interesting about this, is that is very, very solvable. And it will be solvable. Now, the reason why I bring all of this up, and I want to talk about this in depth, is that this is variant-centric. Right now, I have an eBay business that is extremely variant-centric. My business is set up in a particular way where it is self-funding, it is self-active. So if I have a slow December, I'm not going to go massively pick up new merch in January, even if it's the cool stuff on the planet. It's just not going to happen because I base what I buy off of it, and I try not to blow up my portfolio because the point of the business is to produce a massive distribution to me every single month and produce a profit that then comes out of the business because that's the purpose of the business. So if I only sell one comic in December, I usually sell a bunch of comics, but let's say I sell $300 in December because it's a slow December, it's the holidays. I can only buy, if my cost on those $300 for the comics was $100, I can only buy $100 worth of comics, but I take a distribution, which means that's how I run my business, where I'm almost activating and living hand to mouth, but my eBay business is a side hustle. So it operates that way, but it's intentional, where it becomes a self-perpetuity machine and it becomes a self-cycle. And so this is what Frankie Comics didn't do. Again, it becomes a variant trap. It becomes a bigger issue where they have to constantly produce variants to keep customers and to attract customers, and also potentially to keep their relationship with several publishers. Because they do things with Titan, they do things with Marvel, they do things with a variety of other companies, and that's part of the problem, is that they didn't sell through, and they still have to maintain it because they feel that, great, we didn't sell through, we have to borrow money to maintain it, because if we don't maintain this, we might not get to renew it, which will defeat the entire purpose of our business. Again, though, we go back to the Kickstarter problem, which is the bigger issue here with this bankruptcy, where this is a variant-centric comic shop that went bankrupt, which means that if you are only relying on variants, you either need to be really damn good at picking out your variants and be good at SEO and be good at marketing, or have really low costs that your position is so significantly low that you're selling $1,500 worth of comics that cost you $100 to produce. In which you need to either have that, you need to be spot on and picking the best, you need to find cover artists and printing that is good quality and dirt cheap, or you need to somehow figure out a solution so that you get your sell-through either lower, which is where it's good, or you pay your artists really good, but they're the best in the world that everybody wants it, and that you sell out in minutes, and then you're making maybe only $500 per book, but you sell out in 5 minutes every single book you put up. Yes, it's hard. And this is the problem with Kickstarter when companies and publishers go variant-centric. And so that is a big issue, and it's something that I think people have to really understand, is that when you go variant-centric, what we just saw with Frankie's comics is an issue. And it's a big issue, because it is a sign of what more is to come. The sell-through issue is a big issue when you have a lot of variants and you're relying on them. And your story is not the selling point, and a variety of other things aren't the selling point. And the only thing that's selling is the variants. And that is something that I think every comic creator needs to be aware of. It's not the fact that Frankie's, a comic shop, went bankrupt or went out of business. That's not the story. The story is that Frankie's was a specific comic shop. It was a variant comic shop. And that raises questions on the importance and the dangers of variants. Now, I do think that this thing is going to get solved. I think they're going to be around for a while. I think that there's a million ways how they can get out of it. I think somebody can invest in them very, very easily. I think somebody can buy a stake in that company right now pretty dirt cheap if they wanted it. If you wanted a comic shop and you had $1 million, you could probably buy Frankie's for maybe 70, 60 cents on the dollar and get a lot of stuff out of that comic shop, and then become an owner of it, or become a minority owner of it, or they could bond it out. So they could issue out a bunch of corporate bonds anywhere. I think 9% on probably a 5-year term would run them maybe $2,000 a month. So if they really wanted to service the debt, they could raise $250,000 using bonds. I mean, this is not hard for them to get out of this problem. Again, though, it's only $1 million, give or take. So this is an easy solution. Now, Aftershock is a different discussion. My understanding of Aftershock, and this is my understanding of Aftershock, and I'm going to pull this up for everybody because I think this says it all, is very different. Because they also file for a Chapter 11, and my understanding of Aftershock is that they are citing 10 to 50 million in debt and the same amount in assets. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't think Aftershock has 10 to 50 million in assets. I mean, I think that that's a very oversimplification. I know this article is a little bit older. I could see them having maybe 10 million, $20 million worth of assets. I could easily see them having 50 million in liabilities. So supposedly what Aftershock's problem is that it's hard to have $50 million of liabilities if you're just producing comics. I don't even know if it's possible because you have to print a lot of paper, sell a lot of books to have 50 million. I don't even think DC Comics has $50 million in just their comic division. And what I mean by comic division is printing and paying their comic staff. I think it is actually really hard to get to that number. But I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that. What I think happened with Aftershock, and this is also a lesson to everybody, is that they made a lot of plays for television. They made a lot of plays for movies. They put in a lot of stuff and started paying a lot of production companies and film studios and a variety of other stuff. And to make a movie, outlay a movie, if you're doing 10 titles across 10 different books and trying to make them into movies, it's going to cost you a lot of money to do it because you got to pay a lot of people. You got to get writers on. You got to get a lot of lawyers involved. And all of a sudden, that's probably where that 50 million came in. And they owe a lot of money, and they thought it was going to be a big payoff. And probably what happened is that, again, they probably were servicing the debt, and then they couldn't service the debt anymore. And then the debt got recalled, and then they were like, hey, guys, you missed your payment. One payment and you're done. And they're like, we don't have the money. And then Chapter 11 comes into play because it's a financial tool. The difference here is that $1 million is very serviceable. 50 million is a lot harder to service. It's not impossible to service. Companies service 50 million every single day. Again, I invest in companies in the stock market that service anywhere from 10 to $200 million. But they also take venture into it. They take a lot of other stuff into it. And I don't know if these same companies that I invest in would want to touch Aftershock because it's a media play. I'm not saying Aftershock's not unproven, but again, these are titles that are being turned into films that in a media age, there's a lot of good media out there. There's a lot of good properties. And so I don't know if certain companies want to give Aftershock the ability to reorganize, take a stake in some of this stuff, take a royalty, give them, a 7%, position on a 5-year term, or allow them to refinance the debt. I don't know if a company's going to give them that. I don't know if a bank's going to give them that. And what happens is that you go to a bank. So Chase Manhattan Bank, depending on who you are, they might give you the money to do it. Goldman Sachs might give you the money to do it. But a lot of times companies are not big enough to go there. So I don't know if Aftershock is big enough to go onto, Wall Street or wherever Goldman Sachs is. And I use Goldman Sachs as an example to say, hey, can we have $50 million? And I know you're going to charge us a good amount of money for it, and we could service it and we're going to pay it, but we have to get through this difficult time period, and then we'll figure it out from there. I don't think that Goldman Sachs is going to be like, here you go, guys. You're good to go. Have a blast. I don't think Aftershock is big enough for that, or to go to one of these Deutsche Banks or another one. And that's the problem. And then you go to financial stock companies that act like banks that then take a venture position. And again, I don't think they want to touch it. So I think what's going to happen is that I think that Aftershock is going to go through liquidation. Unlike Frankie's comics, which will have suitors and a small bank might grant them a loan, I think what's going to happen ultimately is that, Aftershock's going to go through liquidation. Now, so let me explain to you what happens with liquidation. So now they owe money to a boatload of people, right? In the millions. So you list your creditors. And once your creditors are listed, the trustee or a court basically says, cool, your assets are worth A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So now those assets get sold, they get acquired, and whatever money's paid for those assets, gets goes to the accreditors. It goes into basically one person, a gigantic trust, and then it gets paid out to the accreditors that are owed money, and they get a piece of all that money, and it gets divided relatively evenly. Now, if somebody is owed 50%, it's not like everybody gets $1 of the first $10 and everybody gets $1. No. If you're owed 50% and 100,000 came in, you're going to get $50,000. You're going to get your percentage, but everybody might get 60 cents on the dollar. They might get 20 cents on the dollar, but everybody's going to get money back. Maybe they'll, and then what will happen is that, let's say you go through a liquidation and, the company owes $3 million in debt and everything was liquidated for $5 million, then it might get distributed to the owners. It might get distributed to the rest of the company. So money can get returned to a company. That can happen. It's probably not going to happen, but this raises a question. This is why people with publishers now need to pay attention, is that, great, let's say you brought your book to a publisher, right? And you wrote a book that the company owned, or that they owned a piece of it, or that it was a work for hire. But you were signed a contract saying you're going to work on this book for the next 6 years. What happens to your property? What happens to what you created? Hell, you might have signed a contract saying so-and-so company, it's creator owned, but they own a piece of it, or they get 10% of it, or whatever the deal is. What happens to that 10%? Can another company pick up that 10%? Can another company pick up your book entirely because now it's part of that bankruptcy? And these are great questions that I do not know the answer to, because let's be realistic. Aftershock is not the only company that's going to go bankrupt. It's not. This is the first of many. 2023, in case you haven't realized it, it is going to be a year of bankruptcies. It is going to be a very turbulent year. It's going to be rough. It's going to be rough in comics. It's going to be rough in the business world. I mean, I could tell you Bye Bye Baby and Bed Bath & Beyond are both going to go bankrupt this year. And they are not comic companies. And a variety of other companies are going to go bankrupt. Just recently, Goldman Sachs laid off 3,200 people. And a bunch of other banks like Chase Bank and a variety of others also laid off a bunch of people. It is coming. It is going to be a rough year. This is the first of many. There are going to be problems this year. And if you are a small publisher or even a large one, you might not be taking on new books. You might not be taking on new creators. You might even be getting rid of some older ones or some newer ones and saying, look, we're going to just release you from your contract. Well, we said that if we release you from your contract, your book doesn't do well, you can't touch it for 3 years. But guess what? They might say, look, you can do whatever you want. We're going to void your contract. We like you. We hope to do business with you in the future, but we don't want to produce your book, not because it's not a good book, but we only made $1,500 on it and times are tough and we really cannot afford to play the $1,500 game. We need to have books that make $10,000. When we bring them to a store and they sell through, and that they're more variant centric, they add more value. And so now you're going to have a bunch of people in that boat. Companies might even say, look, if we think we're going to go under, maybe we're going to purposely release all of our people from their contracts so they don't get caught in this crossfire. A company might say, look, we're going to go under. Let's at least try to save as many people and push as many people off this boat and onto a life raft as possible. And it's coming. And so it would not, in my opinion, be unsurprisingly if 4 other relatively small publishers go bankrupt or go belly up or tighten up their ships and become a hell of a lot more selective, which then is going to force another side of things. It's going to force a whole side of an influx of people on Kickstarter. It's going to force more creators. It's going to be good for the consumer because, let's be realistic, if there's 400 products to choose from me every month on Kickstarter, there's bound to be something I love. There's also bound to be people who say, look, I got to step up my game. I got to produce better art. I got to produce better covers. I got to get this person my book. I also need to be cheaper. So as a consumer, I'm going to win. There's no question about that. But as a person who's doing a comic, maybe you're going to need $5,000 to do your book. your goal is going to be $2,500 and you're going to pull in $3,500. And now you're going to have to come up with $1,500 on your own outside of your project because you knew that you can't ask for the $5,000, or you're going to have to ask for the $5,000 and you're not going to make it on the first round. And so that's really what's coming, without a doubt. And if anybody thinks that it's not coming, you are fooling yourselves. And it's not me lecturing you. I mean, it's written in the sky. I mean, it's not that hard to see what this leads to, because I can't think of the company. It used to be Behemoth, and then it was acquired. I mean, that company is just as much at risk as Aftershock is. Now, I don't know their numbers. I'm not trying to single them out, but they are just as much at risk as Aftershock is, because they're spending a lot of money on things. And I know they're involved in some stuff with music and some games, but guess what? It only takes one debt payment service to miss. Now, I don't know if they have debt on their company, but it would be unsurprising if they didn't, because they're a big enough company. Apparently, Aftershock had a lot of debt. They couldn't service it anymore, is my guess, because that's usually how a bankruptcy starts, is when somebody has debt, they can't service it, or they miss a mortgage payment, or they miss a major printing payment, or they miss several of them, and there you go. And it triggers it, and then you're like, I don't have the money, and that's how this kind of goes down. Now, I could be completely mistaken on this, and if I am, please correct me. Anybody out there. But again, that's how I view this. And that's what I think is so interesting on that run. So that's kind of just my take on all of this. And I'm not saying that this is good or bad. I personally think bankruptcies are good. And here's why. It's good for two reasons. I don't want a business to fall apart, right? So anytime a business has the ability to restructure, recover, and then do better and somewhat deal with their creditors, that's a good thing. So that's a good thing. Sorry, I needed to drink that. My throat's a little sore. So that's a good thing, because if a business can be saved, we should encourage that. Even if people only get 60 cents on the dollar, and that's me being very optimistic. But the business continues, and then it goes on for another 30 years before the owner says, I'm good, I'm going into retirement, I'm shutting down my business. That's good, right? We all agree that's a good thing. And so there you go. I like to encourage that, and I would like that to continue. Now, what I think is also a good thing is that when a business goes into bankruptcy, it means they miscalculated, they misjudged, they mismanaged money, they didn't plan accordingly, or sometimes things happen in business and they couldn't restructure ahead of the time. So sometimes a company, what they'll do is that they'll issue more stock, they'll issue more loans. You know, maybe somebody will give more controlling stock, but not more preferred stock. You know, it happens all the time in Vegas with casinos. Happens all the time. And so it happens, and sometimes people do that to avoid a bankruptcy because they don't want to lose something. Conversely, or they feel if they go into bankruptcy, it's going to eventually get into a dissolving factor, which is called liquidation, and it's going to be a forced sale. So that could happen too. So that's kind of what you don't want. But now I also think it's a good thing, because as I stated, usually when a bankruptcy happens, it's because somebody misjudged, mismanaged, zigged right when they should have zigged left, something like that. Usually it's a sign that a business wasn't managed properly. And there's a concept, and Patrick Bet-David speaks about this, where sometimes a forest fire needs to burn down the tallest trees. And you say, but Andrew, tallest trees are nice. But when you have a forest, the tallest trees get all the sunlight and they block the trees at the bottom, and they don't get as much sunlight, and they cannot grow as big because the tall trees are blocking them. And so when the tall trees fall down, what happens is that the smaller trees survive. And when that happens, they then get the sunlight and then they grow and become big. So in a bankruptcy, if a company goes through liquidation, and I'll use Bed Bath & Beyond and Bye Bye Baby, There's going to be smaller companies that maybe have 1 or 2 stores that say, cool, we don't have competition in this sector and we're going to grow and we're going to become bigger. And we know how to do this and we survive because we were adapting to the current times, and we couldn't really expand because they were in the way, but now we can expand because they're not there anymore, and it allows for new businesses to come up. And so sometimes a business needs to go through liquidation and it needs to die. And it sounds mean. But if it was mismanaged, sometimes it needs to die. It needs to go into liquidation. It needs to be put out, for lack of a better word. And it's time for that business to move onward. And obviously it's time for somebody else who has a different vision, a different idea to come take in, or a competitor to come over and take over that territory and do it better, do it more efficient. And that's a good thing. And so that sometimes needs to happen too. And it should happen a lot more. Unfortunately, in our society, our government doesn't allow that to happen. Boeing is a good example of that. Boeing should have been put out in 2018 and in 2020 and in 2022. Should have been done. There should have been no government intervention, and a competitor would have come in and they probably would have built jets faster, cheaper, and more affordable. But our government instead kind of bailed them out. But that's a different discussion for a different day. And it's a much more in-depth, position. But the point is that that's the forest fire. So sometimes big businesses or even small businesses need to go through liquidation so that a new business that does it more efficiently, better, faster can actually innovate and bring in the next generation. So sounds mean. It's a very controversial opinion to say, but I don't want my local comic shop to die. I have money, I have pre-orders, and I get all of that. I don't want Frankie or Aftershock to go out either, but sometimes these companies do need to go out. And it could very well be that Aftershock, they produce some really good products, but maybe another company or a smaller publisher, and there's plenty of them, can take their place and do it better, do it more efficiently, and actually do it more affordable and has a better business plan. And again, I understand that people are going to lose their jobs. I understand that people are going to have a hard time adapting. I get all that, and I feel for them. But unfortunately, that company made a wrong turn somewhere, mismanaged money, Aftershock that is, and clearly they deserve to go through some type of punishment, because I don't see a path to refinance their debt and get them back on track at the moment. Frankie's Comics, the solution is easy. That's not hard. $1 million, that's easy. $1 million, it's a lot of money if you don't have it, but $1 million is not a lot of money in the scheme of things. 50 million is a good chunk of money. And 50 million is a lot harder to manage, because if it's at 9% interest, 9% interest is what, 4.5 million a year? I mean, 4.5 million, I'm even trying to do the math in my head on 12. I don't know that number, so if somebody knows that number, that's really helpful. But again, it's a lot of money every single month just to service that debt. And it's the same reason why Toys R Us failed. Toys R Us failed because they couldn't service the debt every month, and they couldn't adapt because of that. And that's the other thing too. Let's say Aftershock says we have a plan to reservice debt. So now they do 10 million a year. They got to pay 6 million so that they could pay the interest, pay $1 million to start paying the principal down. They got a battle plan over the next 20 years to get rid of their debt. They negotiated some of it down. They have surpluses every once in a while, and they use that straight to debt. Great. But the problem is that what happens when they need to go and do a TV show? They have no money. So they cannot go and do everything else because they're so busy servicing debt that they can't innovate, which is the problem that Toys R Us had. So even if they go through all this, they're still out of luck. And that's the issue here with this entire thing. Frankie's, on the other hand, again, $1 million is not that much money. I mean, you can legitimately probably find 30 people who would happily take an ownership stake in that company. They could give up some equity, and they could raise 1.5 million, $1 million to pay their debt, and $500,000 for working capital deploy that working capital, and then offer 2.5x on rebuying the shares they issue out to the people and put options on that in 5 years. Easy. Problem solved. I legitimately just solved Frankie Comics' issue. And what they would do with that $500,000 is a lot of SEO. They would also move out a lot of their inventory at dirt cheap prices, where if they normally sell a cover and they have excess of it, they might do buy two, get one free, and they would take a short-term hit on that, but they would move a lot of their stock out, which would then also go to servicing that debt or potentially making a purchasing shareholder shares back that they issued out, essentially in their company. And that's a way how to do it. That's one way how to do it. They could bond it out, which means they just have to service the debt over 36 months on commercial bonds. And the way those work is that you pay interest and principal at the exact same time. So 9.5% on a bond, and if they issue $250,000, it would be about $3,200 a month to pretty much all shareholders, give or take, a month for 36 months. So guess what? You purposely move out a lot of merch at dirt cheap prices so you can meet that for 36 months, which is 3 years, and you just took out a quarter of your debt. A quarter of your debt, and you gave up no equity to do it. So yeah, a lot of ways how to handle this for $1 million. Aftershock, they could do the exact same thing, technically, that Frankie wants to do, or could do that I just outlined. They just have to do it at a much larger number, and doing that at larger numbers is harder. Doing it at 250,000 isn't hard. It isn't hard at all. I know everybody in the space who issues small business bonds. I don't know them personally, but I know their companies. They could easily do it. And believe me, I'd probably buy a bunch of those small business bonds on a 36-month term. I'd probably buy a good $500 or $600 worth, which is about 50 or 60 bonds. And I don't think I'm the only one who would buy it. I really don't think I'm the only one who would buy it. I think that bond thing would sell out fast, especially if it's SEO'd right. Oh, it wouldn't even cost them that much money. But that's just my opinions on all this. Obviously, I'm flying solo tonight because my guest had something that was going on, and I don't want to get too much into it. More than happy to fly solo on this topic. I like this topic. I like money. In case anybody didn't know that, I really, really enjoy talking money. And I thoroughly have a good time talking money. So obviously, that's kind of my whole thing. But that's my whole point. Again, I don't think this was that controversial. I wish that there was people around who wanted to hang out and talk about this. But things happen. I get it. It's cool. I'm always open. The invitation's out there. I don't know why people don't want to hang out with me. It's all right. But we're having adult conversations about adult issues. And I think it's a long time coming that we have these conversations. But I appreciate everybody watching this, seeing it, checking it out, enjoying it, tuning in, seeing what the hell this is about, because I like talking about this stuff. And that's what I enjoy, really covering and engaging in. So I really appreciate everybody doing that, checking it out, seeing it, giving me their opinions. Obviously, even though I'm not live, this is up there. If you see this and stumble across it, you are more than welcome to leave a comment either on Facebook or YouTube or wherever else this appears. And I am more than happy to engage with you in the comment section. Obviously, my DMs on Twitter are open. My emails somewhere. My Instagram messages are open. My Facebook messages are open. So obviously, if you see this, you're like, man, I really like that topic, and I'd love to know more about this thing over here. More than happy to have that conversation, both online, offline, wherever you're at. I'm very accessible. Is the point. But I appreciate everybody watching. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. And next week, we're talking about how to deal with bad actors on Kickstarter. So if you would like to be part of that episode, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be controversial. I have a very interesting take on it, and I've been burned on a bunch of projects. There's been bad people collectively on crowdfunders that have been problematic on multiple levels, and we're going to talk about all of it. I got Josh, who is a very cool guy, coming on, and so I'm super excited for that one. And so I definitely recommend tuning in next week for that episode because it's going to be a fun one. I also have a stacked week this week I have tomorrow Rich Parada's coming on. I have Bella Madison or T. Bella Madison coming on Monday. I got Mike Parent coming on. I think I got Dolan from Born of Blood / Merc coming on. I got Dustin Waller coming on. Yeah, I got a stacked card this week, so really cool. And I just did a great interview with Bella Rockefeller, so that's another one that's also very cool to talk about. So I really appreciate everybody tuning in, and everybody have a good Friday night, have a good weekend, and I will see you next week as we hopefully won't fly solo. But again, the show has to go on, and I appreciate everybody tuning in, checking it out, and seeing what I'm doing. And hopefully I'll have a guest next week. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a good one, and I'll catch you in the next one.